So let's now add our first component, because this is just our main Vue app. But I mentioned before in the component introduction module that in Vue, you have both. You have Vue apps and you have Vue components. And every component is like a mini app where you just have the possibility of combining multiple components into one app, and where eventually, covered in the next module, those mini apps, those components, will also be able to talk to each other. And you'll be able to build complex user interfaces by combining different components together. Now, it is a convention that you create a new folder, not a file, named components in your source folder to hold your components. Simply just to make it clear that these are now components and not just any Vue app. Now in here, I'm going to add my new friend contact.vue file to hold the friend contact component which I want to create. You might remember that is the component we created in the component introduction module. Now, if we have a look at the file name, just like with app.vue, I want to make clear what's inside of this file. It will be a component. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in the components folder, but it will be the component for displaying a friend contact. You could name this whatever you want. Could also just name it just contact. But since I plan on naming the component, the custom HTML element friend contact, I want to reflect this in the file name as well. And you could also name it like this. This is the so-called kebab case naming convention, but it is more common to use this Pascal case naming, where you have one word, possibly consisting of multiple words, where you start every word, including the word inside of the word, with a capital character. Now inside of friendContact.vue, since it's a Vue file, we can again create our template area here, and also our script area, just like before. And again, in the script area, I'll export a default object. This will be the configuration object for this component. Because keep in mind, an app component is like a small Vue app. It takes the same configuration object. So of course, we need to export one. Now in the component introduction module, we then added a template key here to define the HTML code of this component in a string. We don't need to do this anymore. We now got this template area in the friendContact.vue file. And that's exactly why we use those .vue files. It makes it much more convenient to create such components and define their templates. We don't need to do this in JavaScript strings anymore, where we get no autocompletion, and which is really just not fun. So instead here, I'm going to create my component markup. So that's the same markup I used in the component introduction module, a list item, and in there an h2 tag where I output the friend.name, and then also a button below that where I said show details, though we're soon going to make this dynamic, and then a nested unordered list in here, like this. Like this, where we then have two list items, one for the phone number, one for the email address. And here I have a strong tag where I say phone. And then here we output friend.phone. And on the second list element, we say email. And then we output friend.email. That's just the same markup we used before in the component introduction module. Now for this to work, we need to add the data field again here and return some data for this component, which is now specific to that component and only to that component, so which is independent from our main Vue app data. And there we had the details are visible property, which initially is false, which we'll use to make this button work and toggle this list. And we had a dummy friend property, which will later replace, but where for the moment I will just store manual so that we can output something here. Again, that is something we'll change later though. And now we will also need to add methods here in our config object and add a toggle details method here to set this details are available to what they're currently not. And here I'm already getting better IDE auto-completion simply because we're in such a .view file and we got the vtour extension installed. So that's already one first advantage in action, which we have just by switching to this project setup with this extra view extension. Now we can connect our template here and add a click event listener to the button where we trigger toggle details and add vif here on the unordered list and check if details are visible is true and only show this if it is true. And now we got the finished friend contact component. Now we register it just as you learned it in the view component introduction module. In main.js, we create our app. We can store this app in a constant and call mount on this app. But then we can also call the component method here. And again here, I'm now getting auto-completion, by the way. The IDE suggests me that there is a component method, and it even tells me which arguments I should provide. And we provide a name, friend contact, and as a second argument, the config object for this component, which lives in a different file and therefore needs to be imported. So I'm importing friend contact from /. Now we need to go into the components folder, and in there we have friend contact.view. So that's the import path we need here to reach the friend contact.view file. And friend contact, now again in the end, just points at this JavaScript object which we're exporting in the friend contact.view file. And that's now what we pass as a second argument to the component method. With that, we unlock the friend contact component in our app. So we unlock this custom HTML element. And now in app view, here in our unordered list, we can add friend-contact as often as we want. And here I'll add it twice. And if we saved it all, it'll rebuild. And on our connected page, we'll see our components without the styling, because for the moment the CSS code is missing, but we see our components and it works just as before. Now, of course, it's pretty ugly like this, so let's next also see how we add styling here before we then ultimately learn more and new things about components.